Welcome, everyone, to Battery Dance TV. I'm Jonathan Hollander, the founder and artistic director of Battery Dance, and I have a series of programs, a series of interviews called Dance Diplomacy with Jonathan, in which I have interviewed diplomats, people working in international affairs, artists overseas and at home. And right now, I am so pleased to have the leadership of Battery Dance's board of directors. I realize that I've worked with these wonderful women for many years. I know their background, and I've been inspired and supported in so many ways by them. And actually, in preparing for this interview, I've learned even more details about the journey that they've both taken in order to arrive at this point. So let me introduce you first to Dr. Helena Kane Finn, who is the chair of the board of Battery Dance. Helena, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's a great pleasure to chair the board of Battery Dance, and I'm most grateful to you for having invited me many years ago to do so.
Thank you, Helena. And Judi Kilachand, who is the vice chair of the board. Thank you, Judi, for coming on board this afternoon and on board to Battery Dance Company's board of directors. I think it was about 25 years ago.
Yes, I think now we can safely say it has been about 25 years, but I couldn't tell you how wonderful it's been working with you and with Helena these last few years, especially with Helena as chair of the board. It's been just a delight and so rewarding and inspiring.
Thank you, Judi. Same here.
Well, we're very lucky. Nonprofit, tax-exempt corporations in America, whether they be hospitals or universities, educational organizations, social service organizations, or in our case, a dance company, is governed by a board of directors. And though I am the president, founder, and artistic director of the company, it is the board of directors that really governs the organization and is a check and balance on the staff. Now, that may sound onerous, but in our case, it's been a tremendous, tremendous benefit because I started as a choreographer and dancer. I created a dance company without real leadership training, administrative training. And I can say that over the years, it's been board members with specialization like Helena and Judi have in terms of the international affairs and running departments of much larger organizations that has then informed me in my practice and my staff as well. So Helena, I'd like to start with you. I know that you have been a senior Foreign Service officer with service all over the world. Could you give us an idea of the ways in which the service that you've done has given you the opportunity to work with American artists, whether they be filmmakers or writers or dance companies? Bring us into that picture, if you would.
Thank you, Jonathan. Well, first of all, becoming chair of this board was a very natural extension of the work I did over the years in public and cultural diplomacy, because what we were doing was programming American artists all over the world. And just to give you some examples, when I was in Frankfurt, I was in charge of the America House there, which was our cultural center. And every major writer of the period, Michael Crichton, Gore Vidal, Susan Sontag, I presented all of them. I hosted dinner parties for them afterwards and enabled the audiences there to come into direct contact with our leading spokespeople in the cultural sphere. We also did a lot of musical programs and we coordinated on dance programs. That's one example. To give you a different kind of example and relating it directly to Battery Dance, Battery Dance came to Israel when I was there, and Battery Dance came to Germany. And in both cases, Battery Dance was working with underserved communities and working really in the field of conflict resolution, which is a great interest to me. Putting together, for example, young Jewish and Arab kids near Tel Aviv for dance programs. And in Germany, now we have a fabulous program working with the refugees. But back then, when I was at the embassy, we also did wonderful things in terms of working with the Turkish and other recent immigrant communities. So those are just some examples. Is that what you had in mind, Jonathan?
Well, yes. I mean, I think what's so interesting is that I know during your career, you had the opportunity to be involved with Liam Neeson and Natasha Richardson and Steven Spielberg, you know, some of the luminaries of American culture, but also the fact that smaller activities with dance companies, I think you said you had worked with Lar Lubavitch on that point. Was that in Turkey?
That was in Turkey, yes. In my very first tour, I was the assistant cultural affairs officer. And in those days, you know, that was during the Cold War, there was so much support. Taxpayers and our Congress were supporting the arts. And we sent every one of our major dance companies to perform at the Istanbul Festival, and then I would bring them out to Ankara. And Laura Lubavitch was just one of them, but they were one that agreed to come to Ankara, where back then it was very hard even to find a suitable stage. You know, Turkey has grown much, much wealthier than it was in those days. So yes, and I can't tell you the impact. I also brought the Verdier Trio playing contemporary classical American music. People had never seen or heard these things before, especially in Ankara. The impact was enormous. They fell in love with America.
Well, I think, you know, Battery Dance has certainly experienced the joy and the love that comes from the abstract form of dance that somehow has a primal meaning for people. And I also know that you speak Turkish, you speak German. So when you, as a diplomat, were able to introduce us to audiences or any of the other American cultural envoys that you hosted, you could speak to people in their own language, only in linguistically, but also culturally.
That's very important. And all diplomats, we have a wonderful system in our diplomatic service. We train people in something like over 150 languages. And so they are supposed to be able to communicate with the people with whom they're in contact in a given country. And it's extremely important. But I would like to say that dance and the visual arts are also music extremely important because they supersede language. And they communicate not just on an intellectual level, but also on a very, very human level. And, you know, we say winning hearts and minds. That was our job in public diplomacy. And the arts win both.
Beautifully said.
Beautifully said. I second that.
A nice segue to you, because thinking about culture, thinking about language, thinking about adaptability that artists have, and also people in the work that you've done as an organizer of incredible international conferences and meetings and person-to-person activities. Could you share with us some of that background that you've had?
Sure. So I ran the global business development and business programs for the Asia Society for 18 years. The Asia Society, as you may know, was founded by John D. Rockefeller III and is a museum in New York, but it's also an institution that forges very close relations between Asia and the US across business policy, and especially arts and education. And while I used to run the global business and leadership initiatives in the US and Asia, which built long-term relationships to secure, I guess one could say, sponsorship revenue for the institution while expanding its impact and base in the US and Asia through innovative programming. I ran the Asian Corporate Conference, which took place every year in a different city in a different country for those 18 years, and was able to meet with local organizers, regional government officials. The conference used to attract an audience anywhere from 600 to 1,200 people. These were business leaders, government leaders, diplomats, media, educators. The conferences covered every topic under the sun with a regional focus, obviously. And it also included cultural performances or exhibitions of local visual arts. And I always used to consult with Rachel Cooper, who you had on the, who you interviewed a few weeks ago, Jonathan, who was the former director of performing arts at the Asia Society and now has the title of director of cultural diplomacy. And I used to consult with Rachel because we always included a cultural performance or a cultural activity. Having a visual arts and arts exhibition or a dance performance or the national symphony of a given country was very important to the conference, and it was very much a part of the cultural exchange that took place, the people-to-people exchange, be it focused on business or policy issues. There was this cultural element there as well. And I think I have some memories, although I left the Asia Society 10 years ago. These conferences were, they built long-term relationships, and I'm still in touch with many of the people who I engaged in Japan, in Vietnam, in India, of course, because I have such a long personal history as well as a professional history there. People look at me and still think I work for the Asia Society.
You probably do. I mean, you continue to introduce people across all kinds of networks.
I did, and I also helped open up the regional offices in Manila, in Seoul, and especially in Mumbai in 2006, with one of our international Asian corporate conferences. I also ran a smaller conference called the Asian International Business Conference, and I did 2 of those in Kazakhstan, which I mentioned because not too many people have been to Kazakhstan. And for me, who has a BA and MA in Russian and Eastern European Studies and Russian language, it was a real treat to go to Almaty and Astana. And I still have a very close friend in Almaty, a Kazakh who I just met a couple of years ago here in New York City. And the conference I did, I think the first one was in 2005 in Almaty, and then another one in Astana in 2008. And even there, we were able to engage traditional musicians and dancers to do a performance. And we held the first contemporary Central Asian art exhibition at the Astana conference, where we actually had a variety of contemporary art, sculpture, paintings on view for the conference participants. And our chairman, Richard Holbrook, who also had a very strong relationship with Kazakhstan at the time, he bought one of the sculptures. I'll never forget this. And the artist was very excited. But that's just a small example of the intercultural exchange that took place amidst discussing important policy and business issues. So I would say, even for the Asia Society as a whole, the arts are as important as these other issue areas.
I think that's, if you take it down to the level of public school education in the United States and the intense focus on STEM over the last 15 years or so.
Now STEAM.
Too often the STEAM is left out of it for the arts, but we all know from our experience that the arts are very much impacting the way that a young person develops into somebody responsible in the world. And I'm wondering what it was like, Helena, for you to leave this huge bureaucracy of the State Department and move into positions at Columbia University and the American Council on Germany, and onto the board of Battery Dance when, you know, you were used to having a very large staff that you would direct and delegate. And in this case, with Battery Dance and with some of the other organizations, you had to reformat your way of thinking and your way of working. Was that a difficult transition for you?
Well, first of all, let me say, Jonathan, if you're an American diplomat serving in countries all over the world, wealthy, highly developed countries like Germany and Austria, and developing countries that are not fully democratic by any means, such as Pakistan, countries with long-running conflicts like Israel, you learn to adapt because the programming I did for audiences in Germany was necessarily completely different from programming I would do in Pakistan or in Israel or in Turkey. So you've spent a life moving in, landing up in an embassy somewhere or a consulate, not knowing anyone, and quickly finding ways, establishing a community of people, often people who've been on Fulbrights and other American grants or studied in the United States, who interpret for you. And of course, you've got the language. So, after you've done that, you just adapt again. And it is a challenge, moving into a small office and just having one or two interns. But I had done that when I was at the Council on Foreign Relations also. And it's just different. But, essentially the goals are the same because working for an NGO or being at the university, my goals were always the same. At the university, I wanted to write my memoir, and I did that. And I worked very closely with my friend David Phillips at the Institute for the Study of Human Rights, which is a very important interest of mine. So yeah, it just came naturally. And as for Battery Dance, that's what I was doing for my 33 decades, 30 years in diplomatic service. So it was a very natural transition, I have to say. Mm-hmm. And the board, I want to say, aside from you, Jonathan, and the staff of Battery, Ahmad, you are fantastic people to work with. And Judi and the rest of the board are incredibly supportive. And we saw that when we had to deal with all the challenges of this pandemic. We had weekly, bi-weekly meetings, and the board and our board is all over the world in different time zones. Everybody came together, and we found a number of silver linings in these clouds presented by the coronavirus.
That's very true. I think that the support that we as a staff felt as we ourselves were separated, mm-hmm. working remotely, but having those voices of expertise and encouragement was tremendously helpful. I wouldn't trade anything. It was really remarkable. Judi, what about you in terms of your transition? First of all, you came on the board of Battery Dance at a time where our international focus was really not sketched in at all. It was just a vague, every once in a while, I would take the company on tour, come back with huge debt, and people on the board didn't understand why we were losing money.
And would get very angry.
Yeah. And so we weren't unified. And I think that that's actually a good quality on a board where you have diversity of opinions and not a rubber stamp. But you were one who did see that there was a potential for distinguishing Battery Dance in terms of our international work. Could you take us back to some of those times, like in '97 when Battery went to India and Sri Lanka and performed in 17 cities? It was a kind of Herculean task.
It was a Herculean.
As a board member.
It was. I was totally supportive, and I saw the writing on the wall because I was working at an organization like Asia Society. I was already doing international work, and every country where I went, I always tried to introduce you to the ambassador.
Let's use the word try. Let's use the word succeeded in.
Okay, yes. And then we would connect with the consul generals and the ambassadors here from those countries. And it was such a wonderful opportunity for me to contribute to Battery Dance in that way, because I was working 24/7 during those years, and I really didn't feel like I gave as much as I wanted to Battery Dance, considering what I've been able to contribute these last 5 to 10 years when I've had my own consultancy and launched my own business. I was really very busy during the years I was at the Asia Society. So that was the least I could do to introduce you not only to government leaders, but also to potential sponsors, especially in countries like India, where I had, in 97, I did their first New Delhi conference, and it was hugely successful. And I had met so many people, and I always tried to leverage those relationships. I was a very entrepreneurial staff person at the Asia Society and was always looking for opportunities to use my networks, not just to the benefit of Asia Society outside of the business programs department. I brought in some think tanks. I would introduce authors and writers to our bookstore. I introduced fashion designers and retailers to the Asia Society store. There wasn't teachers and educational institutions to the education department. There wasn't any facet of Asia Society that I didn't explore through my work as heading up these corporate conferences and the business programs. But I loved being able to introduce Battery Dance. And I felt that touring internationally was going to be very important for Battery's name and brand. And ultimately,
I don't think we would have prevailed with the board without your voice. Honestly, at that time, we didn't have Helena yet.
No.
But I think your decision making as board members and as leaders on the board is informed by your own experiences, professionally and personally. I mean, both of you have, your educational background with the learning many languages, studying the culture and history and politics of different countries around the world. People don't think of a dance company as needing to have read the politics section of the newspaper, for example, or the financial section of the newspaper. But I learned pretty early on that if I wanted to be able to sustain a dance company in this very competitive environment where in America we cannot count on major government support that's going to carry an institution such as in Europe, the model at least has been that state support, the major support, and everything else is sort of, decoration. But here, individual support and corporate sponsorships, foundation grants, and the government, it's a complex matrix. And if it isn't all there, then the chances of survival are slim. And that brings us to today. As Helena, you were talking about the transition to the virtual world and the remote learning. You've both been almost weekly involved with that process with Battery Dance. I mean, what is your perception of the next 6 months, Helena? What do you think is going to be happening, and how do you think we can adapt?
Well, first of all, what we've learned is this pandemic has been unpredictable. Things got much better in the summer. Dr. Fauci warned us they would get worse in the fall, but they got even much worse than we anticipated. So far worse. So I think as we look to the future, we have to be willing to improvise as we have been doing all along. And that's a good thing in dance and music. And, the great American musical art form, jazz, is all about improvisation. So we have to continue to do that. But I I think the vaccines are a light at the end of the tunnel. It will take many months before people are vaccinated. And given that so much of what we do is international, it's going to be next summer or beyond before we can resume touring, because I don't think air travel will come back until then. But the plus side of all this is that look at what we did with the Battery Dance Festival. Instead of just being in Lower Manhattan and people coming and seeing it, which is fantastic, now it opened up for the whole world. And people were tuning in from everywhere to see
over
see our
200 countries,
festival.
actually.
Yes. So I think this has been an opportunity for Battery Dance to vastly increase its international presence and recognition. So I think we're going to continue to do those things even after we get back to the point where our dancers are traveling again.
Yes, I agree with you.
I just want to add to that, Helena, also, and Jonathan, and remind you of what a nimble and lean and innovative organization Battery Dance is. It has been so inspiring to see what Battery did during this pandemic. You came out with Battery Dance TV in March at a time when no other dance company had thought of providing content quite yet. You were doing, I don't know, 7 programs a day, plus your weekly interviews on dance diplomacy. I mean, this was such a creative and innovative experience for Battery Dance, and for Batteries, for you and Ahmad, our vice president, for the staff, for the dancers to step up their game in such a way. It was thrilling to see. And as Helena mentioned, the festival going virtual, I mean, that was probably one of the best things that we could have done. And I think our future lies in doing both in-person performances as well as virtual content, providing virtual performances. So I see that being something that Battery will probably continue. But it is the fact that Battery Dance has accomplished so much on such a lean budget with such lean resources, Jonathan, and it's such a testament to you and to your staff. And I can't say how inspiring it is.
Well, all this conversation really reminds me of something that I hold very dear in terms of our own American culture. I think the culture of volunteerism, the culture of the fabric of NGOs, nonprofit organizations, that it's a web of support across the country.
And the entrepreneurial nature of some of those organizations. That's also a testament to the American fabric, so to speak.
I mean, we all have to work together. And I think that, again, going back to that issue of, does a dancer need to read the financial pages and the politics? I think we have to have our eyes and ears open. We're part of a global society now. There's not one aspect of our lives, whether it's going to the grocery store and buying a slice of cheese or what, everything is global. And it's incumbent upon us to respect that and to respect all of the people around the world in the different countries and cultures that are contributing to our lifestyle.
But Jonathan, you're more than a dance company. I think you're selling Battery Dance a little short. You are a global arts education organization. Look at the work you're doing through Dancing to Connect programming around the world, which used to be an in-person education program and initiative. Helena, you mentioned the refugee program in Germany, where Battery Dance dancers are bringing German and refugee young underprivileged people together to learn and learn dance, choreograph, and perform. And it went virtual for the first time this past fall. And we've seen the film, which is the result of that experience, which is so fantastic. And another testament to Battery Dance stepping up.
Yes, well, I'm very optimistic, Jonathan and Judi, about the future because our country is returning now. It's pulling itself out of isolationism and returning to multilateralism. And what that means is reestablishing contact with our friends and our allies, and even those countries that are not so friendly around the world. And there is a lot of room for Battery Dance and other cultural organizations to work in those countries, whether it's done through technology or physical presence.
Mhm.
So I'm optimistic, and I'm hoping that our taxpayers and our Congress, when we get past this pandemic, will see the point of doing that again, as you know, was the case in the past. I was very lucky to have started working in the diplomatic service at a time when the taxpayer and the Congress did not question the importance of communicating with global audiences through the arts.
That's very true. And I think that, you know, you mentioned, Helena, at one point in the conversation, the Fulbright program.
Mhm.
Thinking about Senator Fulbright and the Fulbright organization that has sent thousands, I don't know what the numbers are, of American scholars overseas and brought scholars from overseas to America. I don't think we can overestimate how much impact has happened from those types of exchanges. And it's, you know, right now it's really hard because people had to come home from their postings, you know, either back to their countries from the US or back to the United States from their various countries around the world. So I know that there will be some kind of a transition that will have to happen as the pandemic is, you know, over. People are vaccinated, people, you know, and are able to go back to some sense of normal, and then exchanges will kick in again. And as the beneficiary of a high school exchange program and the Fulbright program twice, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing had I not had those experiences. And I think, you know, Judi, Helena, you've lived abroad, you speak foreign languages, you brought people here, so many people here. So, you know, this is the fabric of the international side of America, and Battery Dance is just proud to have two of you, you know, as our leaders. We're so fortunate that we speak the same language, that we have courageous leadership, and that you don't hesitate to question things that happen here. You know, as I said earlier, it's not the question of a rubber stamp board, because I think there are such a thing. Or there could be a board where the staff and the board are constantly in conflict over money, over decision making. We have very robust conversations with our board members and with you as the leaders. So thank you so much for sharing so much of yourselves in this interview and for continuing with your service on the board of Battery Dance. Thank you so much, Judi Kilachand.
Thank you. Thank you,
Helena,
Jonathan.
thank you for joining me this afternoon.
Jonathan, for having us.